Good afternoon and welcome to this Governors for Schools webinar being run in conjunction with Irwin Mitchell solicitors. Today we're joined by Jenny Arrowsmith and Amy O of Irwin Mitchell solicitors for a presentation on reputation management in schools. Before I hand over to Jenny, can I just check that everyone can hear by asking you to select the raise hand button on your webinar panels. Excellent, lots of hands going up so you can all hear. Just a reminder that on your webinar panels, you'll be able to download the slides from this webinar. And you'll also find a question box where you can send in your questions to Amy and Jenny during the webinar. The webinar will be available to watch back on our website and share later this afternoon. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to Jenny.
Thank you. I just wanted to do an introduction to our team, really. Irwin Mitchell are a national law firm which you may have heard of. We're full service and do the whole range of support to organisations, but we've got a particular presence and sector specialism in education. So we've been working with Governors for Schools for about a year and a half now, and partnering with them at various events and things. We work for schools and also FE colleges and higher education too. And that covers the whole range of areas. The reason we've chosen this topic today, reputation management, is this is probably one where we're seeing a growth in the last year. Myself, I'm the head of education for the national practice, so I look after the whole sector. But I'm also an employment lawyer day to day, and this is one issue that commonly arises. So I might get in a case to do with a staffing matter, but it does have reputational management issues. So that's where I would then work closely with Amy, and that will probably come through as we're going through today. But Amy and her team are seeing more and more of these issues becoming relevant to schools, and we're supporting schools on it. So we thought it was quite a timely opportunity just to cover the key issues in that area, talk about some case studies as an example of some of the things that we've seen, and help you as leaders and governors within schools to be able to understand the issues and to what extent you're able to do anything about it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Amy, who's a litigation specialist in our reputation management team.
Thanks, Jenny. So yeah, I work with schools, academies and colleges, and I support them when they are faced with a reputation management issue or crisis. And this is why I've been asked to prepare this webinar for you. So let's begin with the first slide. This covers an overview of the topics I will cover in today's webinar. I will talk about why it is important to manage your school's reputation and what the risks are if you don't. I'll then go on to discuss the effect social media may have on your school's reputation. Then I'll provide you with some examples of headlines that I've read about schools and some tips on how best to handle the press. I then think it would be helpful to provide a brief overview of what legal action, if any, you may choose to take to resolve a reputation management crisis. Next, I'll run through a few case studies with you so you can see the different approaches you may take if you are ever faced with a reputation management issue. And finally, I'll close with some top tips on how best to protect your school's reputation. So, why is it important to manage your school's reputation? Aside from the personal impact of protecting your staff from online comments about them, it's important your school maintains a good reputation. You have many stakeholders, pupils, parents, the local community, and they all expect you to deliver a safe learning environment. Bad publicity can stick and tarnish the name of your school, which in turn can mean that pupils or parents look elsewhere. It remains the case, of course, that application of admissions policies influence choice, but parents and pupils do have a choice of where to go, and this can extend beyond local schools outside of catchment areas if they feel that there is a better option for their child. We therefore appreciate that you need to attract pupils to your school to fill your published admission numbers, because by doing so, your school would obtain the maximum amount of funding that is available. And funding, as you all know, is generally an issue for schools. Reputation risks apply to all organisations, But with schools, your stakeholders are emotionally invested in the services you provide. It's much more personal to them. As such, and with the ease of social media and speed in which messages, good or bad, spread, it's all too common for posts on Facebook or other such media to be made without a second's thought, whether in anger, jest, or in gossip, and for the message to spread. For schools, unfortunately, we've seen this impact them negatively, and in a few ways. So let's go on to look a bit more closely at this. Social media. So how can social media affect your school's reputation? You will all be aware of various social media platforms, such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that are all used worldwide. Approximately 3 billion people operate a social media account. As you will all know, social media is a means of communication where people voice their opinions, share articles and online content about just about anything. Anything that is posted online can be shared with the world in an instant, which is the biggest strength, but also the biggest weakness of social media. Therefore, the impact of a comment can be significant very quickly. Social media platforms are advocates of freedom of speech and information, so it is very difficult to contact anyone at the platforms and get any content removed. So once a post or comment is out there, it's usually out there, unless the person who posted the comment removes it themselves. And sometimes people have anonymous profiles, so it can be very difficult to find out who's operating a particular social media account to ask them to remove specific content. I will go on to explain later on in this webinar what your options are with approaching and getting a social media account holder to remove comments about your school. So how can social media affect your school? Ultimately, if anyone can say anything and you can't control how people will interpret content posted on social media, then social media exposes your school's reputation to significant risk if it isn't managed properly. And I think a quote by Warren Buffett sums it up very well when he said, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and only 5 minutes to ruin it." I'll let you take a moment to have a look at some of the headlines on this slide. As I'm sure you can imagine, the last thing you'd ever want to read is a headline about your school, like any of the headlines on this slide. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you are aware, often the press will publish a story about a school, or anyone for that matter, when they only have one side to a story. A negative article that is published about your school could harm or cause significant damage to your school's reputation. Unfortunately, a number of schools that we've worked with have had newspaper articles such as these published about them. What you need is a reputation management crisis strategy in place should you become aware that a negative article may be published about your school. I'll go on to discuss a number of case studies, one of which includes handling the press and what your options are later on in the webinar. The good news is that there are things you can do when reputation management issues arise, and that's essentially what my team do here at Irwin Mitchell. We're supporting clients in all sectors with these issues, and I'm speaking to you today because in the last 12 months, we've seen these issues impact schools more and more, and we've helped a number of schools resolve these issues and these types of situations that they found themselves in. To set the scene, I'll briefly cover some of the legal issues here, and then I'll go on to look at practical steps to address these issues. You will have heard of the terms defamation, libel, and slander, but when is a comment any of these things? You will have a cause of action, which means a legal basis to bring a claim, in defamation if a publication is made to third parties of words or other matter that convey an imputation capable of causing serious harm to your reputation. So to what extent does a comment have to be published to be defamatory? So long as the material complained of has been published to at least one person other than your school, then this amounts to a publication to third parties. So the threshold here is very low. But what is the threshold for serious harm? Section 1 of the Defamation Act 2013 states that a statement is not defamatory unless a publication has caused or is likely to cause serious harm to the reputation of the claimant. In the Supreme Court's decision in the case of Lashow v. Independent Print Limited, this has well established the test for serious harm, and that is that the claimant must show as a matter of fact that serious harm has been caused or is likely to be caused to the claimant. If this can be demonstrated by way of financial harm, and that's serious financial harm, then the threshold is usually satisfied. Harm to reputation may be deemed to be serious harm. However, serious distress or injury to feelings is not serious harm for the purposes of establishing whether you have a cause of action in defamation. Please also be aware that there is a limitation period for bringing an action in defamation. The limitation period is 1 year from the date of the publication of a defamatory statement. You should also be aware that there are defences to a claim in defamation. One of the defences is the defence of truth. If the defendant can prove that the statement complained of is true, then this is a defence to a defamation claim. The burden of proving a statement is true lies with the defendant. There is also the defence of honest comment. It won't come as a surprise to you that honest comment is one of the most popular defences that is pleaded. If a statement is an opinion based on fact, and it is the honest opinion of a defendant, then this amounts to a defence to a claim of defamation. The words must be discernibly in the nature of a statement of opinion rather than a factual allegation. The defence is defeated if the defendant if the defendant is shown not to have held the opinion. Again, the burden of proving a statement is of honest opinion and based on actual facts lies with the defendant. And another defence is the defence of privilege. For example, words spoken during parliamentary proceedings or during judicial proceedings are protected by privilege. Also, communications between a solicitor and a client are protected by privilege. I will just touch briefly on libel and slander. Libel is a statement deemed to be defamatory that is in written form and is known as libel. This term is interchangeable with a statement that is defamatory. And finally, slander. A statement is deemed to be defamatory that is spoken, and this is not in written form. This is known as slander. A claim of slander requires proof of the actual words spoken and also proof of specific financial loss, unless a slander is imputed as a criminal offence or is made about someone in their capacity in their office, trade or profession. I think it would be helpful to look at some case studies where in each case I will share with you issues that 3 different schools faced that I've worked with. I'll then explain what we did to help the school and what the outcome of each case was. So turning to the first case study. The school expelled a pupil, and the parent of the pupil created a number of Facebook groups to express the reasons why she didn't agree with the school's decision to expel her son. A number of parents and former pupils posted comments on the various Facebook groups and about the school and the head teacher that were simply not true. Some examples of those posts were that the school doesn't support children with mental health issues, the head teacher doesn't care about pupils with mental health issues, and in some cases the head teacher was labelled to be a bully. In actual fact, the school has a counselling and mentoring scheme in place to help pupils with mental health issues and also asks external support staff to come into the school to provide additional support to those that suffer with their mental health. The Facebook groups were not private, so anyone on Facebook could access the posts and comments that were posted in these groups. This meant that the wider impact of the views of that small group of people were broadcasted widely, and the Facebook groups were starting to threaten a lot of the very good work that the school had been doing to positively support mental health in the school. The groups also became worryingly personal about the head teacher, which became highly distressing. When the comments became distressing for the head teacher, this is when I discussed the matter with Jenny, who from an employment perspective could look and advise the school on the school's duty of trust and confidence that it has to its staff members. The good news is that we were already working with the school from an employment law perspective, so they were able to get in touch quickly with our specialist team. The first thing we do in this situation is we understand the background to the matter, the risks, and then we agree a strategy for moving forward and mitigating ongoing risk. In this case, we considered that the comments and posts were defamatory of the school and the school's head teacher, and that the school had a cause of action to threaten to sue the people that were posting defamatory content of the school and the head teacher online. Letters to the offending party do not always resolve matters, and sometimes they can inflame a situation. And it's important to remember that letters may be published online and in newspapers. Even so, sometimes the content of letters may limit damage to schools when published. Here, the decision was taken to write to the individuals that were posting defamatory content, and the Facebook groups were removed from Facebook, which was a very good result for the school. I must say, though, threatening to sue an individual for defamation is not always the best thing to do, and we will always assess the merits of making those threats on a case-by-case basis. There is always a strategic assessment to be made. The important thing is to get in touch quickly if something like this happens to your school and has the potential to escalate, because the sooner advice is sought, the more options you will have to manage any continued negative content that is posted online about your school, on Facebook or elsewhere. So moving on to the second case study. This was when a number of parents of a particular school posted various comments on mumsnet.com about their disagreement with the school's policy. The posts were not an accurate reflection of the school's policy, as I'm sure you can imagine. Someone saw the Mumsnet posts and then discussed the school's policy with the local press, and this parent expressed their disagreement. It unsurprisingly hit the press with a very negative headline. The school then contacted our team, and we contacted the press to let them know that we were in the process of advising the school on an appropriate response. Often it is better to get a lawyer and/or a PR specialist involved, because then the press generally takes matters more seriously, and in some cases will refrain from issuing an article if they think it's likely you will publish a comment or a counter statement. We supported the school and advised the school on how to prepare an appropriate response to the press under tight time constraints, which is often the case when you're dealing with the press. We spoke to the journalist who was writing the article about the school, and we drafted, with a PR firm, an appropriate response, which successfully diffused the situation, and no further articles were published in the press about this matter. We work closely with PR firms that can provide us with further support in this area, so if your school is challenged by the press on something that the school or any staff member has done, please get in touch and we can try and help you manage the situation. The school said they benefited from having a point of contact at the firm to discuss and decide how to handle the press and what comment they should provide to limit as much damage as possible. So moving on to the third and final case study. A school was involved in a dispute with a third party regarding use of shared facilities. The third party circulated and displayed leaflets about the dispute, which the school didn't agree with. We were not, in this case, of the view that the comments made about the school were defamatory, but even so, we were able to support the school in a strategy for how best to resolve this matter. This was with a view to avoid any further escalation. We wrote to the local authority and we put them on notice that we were aware of their activities, and we confirmed we would continue to monitor their activities unless they removed the content complained of. This worked, and the dispute was contained and addressed directly without involving wider publication. This was, of course, a good result for the school. So a key message from all of this is to remember that where and if this issue affects you, please do remember that help is available and you are not in it alone, nor do you have to just put up with the disgruntled and negative onslaught of any comments on social media or in the press about you or your school. So I'd like to close with some top tips. Put in place a reputation management crisis strategy. Put in place a process that is followed if there is an internal or external threat to your school's reputation. Think about who will deal with or respond to any negative comments that are made on social media or to the press. Do you have a budget in place to deal with this kind of crisis? If not, then this might be something to think about. And monitor your social media accounts to check what's been said about your school. Provide a specific team or individual with the responsibility of checking what is being said about your school on social media. Check hashtags and searches of your school name on social media platforms and on Google on a regular basis. And finally, always remember your brand. When dealing with a reputation management crisis, often you don't have much time to decide what to do. Don't forget the school's brand when responding to any negative comments that are made online. Always think about the tone and wording that you would like to use. And that draws for today's webinar to a close.
Thank you. If there's any questions, I think there's a facility for asking questions. And we've said that we will endeavour to get answers. We can either split time now or governors of schools are going to share any questions with us and we can respond. Oliver, you may be in a position to clarify if any questions have come through. I can't quite see whether they have or not.
Yes, we've had a question here from Vicky about written negative comments, but she's asked how it's possible to challenge verbal comments or rumours that are damaging within a small community such as a village.
Okay, so it is always much more difficult to threaten legal action if you are aware of comments that are verbal. And this is because often, if you were to escalate matters and issue proceedings, a court would require a contemporaneous witness statement of the comments that are made verbally. So someone at the time would have to have been there and be willing to provide a witness statement. Now, if it's the case that you can obtain that kind of evidence, then yes, then we'd look to pursue that and we'd claim that that was slanderous of a particular person or a school.
Okay, we've got another. Okay, we have another question from Keith. It's kind of a comment as well. Do the press ever print anything that isn't negative? So he's saying that the press is not a friend based on my experiences, and sometimes contacting the press could lead to escalation and further articles. Sure. So he's asking, is it better not to involve the press at all?
Sure. So that's a really good question, Keith. With the press, we have to assess risk on a case-by-case basis. There have been some cases where we've provided a counter statement and it's diffused a situation and there hasn't been any further publication of material in the press. But sometimes I've advised schools and I've said, actually, the best thing is to say nothing. This will go away more quickly than if we try and act on the defensive side. So it will just have to depend on the facts of the particular case. And also, I'd say it depends on the particular press that you're dealing with.
Okay. We have a question here from Sean. He's asking, do you recommend schools have a social media presence in terms of having their own accounts? And should these be used to respond to comments and such like on social media?
Sure. So I think will ultimately be the decision of a school whether they want to operate a social media account or not. I'm by no means a marketing expert, but I'm aware that at Irwin Mitchell we have a social media account because we use it to market and publicise our activities. So if a school thinks that a social media account may benefit them from having that in place, then I understand why you'd have one in place. In terms of using an account to respond to negative comments, I would say best not to in the first instance. I would seek advice from a PR specialist in the first instance, or with someone like myself, because if you do respond to, say, a negative comment that's made by a particular person, that can escalate matters. So again, you'd have to assess the risk on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and just adding to that from a purely observational perspective, only the other week there was a school that was obviously impacted by coronavirus, and in terms of sending some children home who'd been on an Italy skiing trip. There was many across the country. Now, I saw in my local press that the school that was involved there, which I thought handled it extremely well, were the messages in the local press presented it as the school defends their position, and it kind of alluded to some negativity, which obviously gets you reading the article. I see that. Actually, the article was very fair and objective, but what I thought was concerning is the ability now on online newspapers for the public to comment, and I saw that then there was a lot of completely unrelated comments, really, about the school, some good, some bad, but it was all very much about personal opinions. And on balance, it wasn't too bad. There were some people who obviously had issues and some who didn't, and it was a very emotive subject, of course. But what I thought is it would be so tempting, like in anything, to go on if you were in the school and defend your position, and actually that would be the wrong thing to do, because it's just encouraging more and more banter, effectively, which was in a social media forum, and instead better to stick to your formal press statement or formal statement affirming your position. And that's exactly what the school did, and I thought as a bystander it read very well, and it was a strong position. We're not getting involved in that online discussion.
Okay, thanks. We've got another question from Gemma, who says they've discovered several Instagram accounts anonymously sharing photos and memes of staff and students, and she's asking whether there's any legal argument to get these accounts taken down. All the reports they've made to Instagram presumably have so far been unsuccessful.
Yeah, and I would have expected that. It's very hard to reach anyone at any social media platform. So if these images are deemed to harm the reputation of an individual or a school, so if the particular memes have a statement that would lower the estimation of those individuals in the minds of others, then we could argue that that they are defamatory, and we could approach by sending a message via the Instagram account, which we've done before, and say, look, we're taking legal action, and these comments are defamatory. But I wouldn't be able to assess without seeing the Instagram posts themselves. But if you think there's a chance that they would cause harm to these individuals because of certain things that have been said in these posts, then yes, it should be something that you need to consider.
Okay, thank you. Another question from John. So if a parent puts comments on Facebook inside a private group, which are considered to be defamatory, is it still counted as in public?
Yes, that is a very legal question, actually, that we have to have a think about every time we're approached. So yes, if a private group is accessible because there's more than one group member other than the claimant, or the school in this case, then yes, that would be seen to be a publication to third parties, and that would fulfil the threshold of a publication.
I see. And Gillian has asked a similar question about rumours spread within WhatsApp groups, and as they're in closed groups, they were unsure how to respond to it.
Okay, understood. So again, it's similar to my previous answer. If this WhatsApp group consists of more than one person other than the school or someone associated with the school, then yes, this would be deemed to be a publication to third parties for the purposes of meeting that threshold to have a cause of action in defamation.
And I don't know whether these WhatsApp groups involve staff, and we've seen that in the employment perspective, so it's not so much a social media reputational issue, but then there are things you can do in relation to those groups as well if they're closed WhatsApp groups, but actually starting to impact on workplace issues.
And a question from Yvette. What if school staff are exacerbating issues by talking negatively to parents?
Well, there I'd recommend you have a social media policy for your staff. So we'd always advocate that, because sometimes staff need to go on social media because you have social media accounts and you need to be putting, you know, updates about parents' evening or whatever out there. So you need to restrict who can use that platform on behalf of the school. But the other and most important part of social media policy is ultimately to set those boundaries, so people using social media are aware that whilst they may be doing it in the private capacity, it might be their own account, to the extent that that is linked to them as a teacher or a member of the staff of your school, and the comments that they're making impact negatively on their professional role or the school, that you may be able to take action in relation to that. So social media is a really good way of, a social media policy, sorry, is a really good way of setting that boundary, and it's used many times where we've seen, for example, I had last year a case of where there was some harassment comments, bullying comments really, not being made within the workplace, but being made outside of work, but on a social media platform. But that social media account did show where that individual worked, so they were, you know, it does put you into a poor reputation, but also that impacted on the workplace relationships between these two people. So we were able to take some action in relation to that member of staff, and there was a social media policy that helped set those boundaries, and therefore help the school be able to take some fair and appropriate action in relation to. It's something that we see quite common.
We've had a few viewers ask whether there are examples of crisis management strategies for reputation, whether there are templates or processes that can be followed that are available.
Yeah, so what we do is we will often go and visit or have a meeting with a school and help them formulate a bespoke reputation management crisis strategy with them, because I'm sure you can imagine there are a number of variables that will affect the type of strategy that you have in place. I can't say there's one that I haven't looked myself, if there's one you can access online, but I know we wouldn't say there's a template one. I mean, the things that I said at the end on my top tips are really the key things to think about. So it's having the team in place, having a process, knowing what you would do, having the right people you'd contact in those instances, and just having an assigned person to check online and social media accounts. I think that's really invaluable, because then you don't need to pay anyone anything for that. We just use your internal staff, so whether it's an admin person or someone in HR who's interested in these issues can think, well, on my lunch break I'll just check what's happening online and can identify anything to the relevant people. But I think it's just really getting your people in place as first and foremost. And then if anyone wanted to speak to me about getting a proper strategy in place, I'd be delighted to speak to you.
Okay, great, thanks. A question here from Lisbeth, who's asked, what if parents refuse to sign up to the school's social media policy? Can they be refused access to social media that's controlled by the school?
The social media policy I was talking about is the staff, in response to the question about staff engaging on social media. I think going back to that question, if you were talking, I think that was about staff commenting on social media in response to parental comments, and that wouldn't be recommended, just in the same way Amy was talking about earlier about not commenting back in dialogue on open forum. I don't think you'd be able to get parents to sign up to social media. I mean, I think I suppose you could have general guidelines that you could issue out, but I mean, whether they comply with it or not, the way that you would, well, one, it'd be very difficult to monitor, I would imagine, and two, in terms of enforceability, it's all the things that Amy's been talking about today.
Okay, thank you. Seems like we've come to the end of the questions. I don't know if there's any more questions that people want to send in before we wrap up. Just give you a few seconds. So Gillen's made a comment here that they've also asked governors to sign up to the social media policy, the same one that staff use.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sensible.
Yeah.
Mohammed's asked about fake Google reviews. Is there anything that can be done about those? Can they be taken down or removed?
Yes, I'm not sure what he means by reviews, but you can contact Google if you see a web page or an ad that's about the school that you're unhappy with, and then what you'll be given is a drop-down tool of options to challenge that particular web link or Google ad. One of them is defamation and IP infringement. But then at that case, you'd have to demonstrate why that's the case. But what I will say is, having had to contact Google on a number of occasions, sometimes you will just get a says no. I think it's hot luck whether you actually get to reach a human being at the end of the request. So it's not easy, is what I'll say.
Yeah. Keith has asked whether school governors should seek advice from legal or public relations experts on reputation management in the first instance.
Sure. So it would depend on the issue. The most serious of comments that you ever see about a school, and if you think it's going to cause serious harm to your school, I would say contact a lawyer in the first instance, so a reputation management specialist. Because just with a phone call, it's not the case that a lawyer is going to charge you. They can give you your options, and then you can decide what to do best for the school. Now, from a PR perspective, I would say if you're dealing with the press, I would put them before a lawyer. If you want an immediate response and advice on what and how best to deal with it. But then if you wanted to respond with a counter statement that had anything legal in it, I mean, a PR firm would already say speak to a lawyer. But yes, when dealing with the press, go to a PR firm first and foremost. If you see a very, very harmful statement, go to a lawyer.
Okay, thank you. I mean, is there any sense that of a budget that should be put aside towards situations like this for schools, or is it something that they just have to manage as they arise?
Well, speaking generally, I could say that of the cases that we've dealt with, there's some have been nipped in the bud quite quickly, and some have ended up requiring a bit more time. In fact, all of those matters that Amy's been talking about was supported by us on our Bank of Hours service, which is there for lots of different ad hoc matters, and that's how our clients, and that's all we can speak in relation to, because that's where we see our clients budgeting for it, is they get a certain level of legal support, and then that is available as and when things are needed. So not specifically a budget for reputational, but a budget for the whole of legal support and ad hoc queries. That's how our schools have been able to get that budgetary control over it. But I can't really say more broadly than that in terms of what other schools would be doing or how you would provide for that. But I think, like anything, where there's a litigation risk, it's prudent to ensure that you have some provision for those emergencies that may come up, because they do come up, and increasingly we are seeing them come up. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah. And I think, as I touched on earlier in the presentation, our job is to try and resolve matters for you as quickly as possible. So that will always be the strategy that we adopt and that we agree with you. So yeah, it'll be a case of, if we can nip it in the bud before we even charge you, then we'll do that. But it'll just depend again on the circumstances of the matter.
A final question here from Alexandra before we wrap up. Would you advise a governor with PR skills or PR experience being a priority for schools when appointing governors to the board?
Well, Not particularly, because I don't think it's a day in, day out. The skill sets for governors, I would say, is much more in relation to HR, finance, and those issues that do occur on a day-to-day basis, and then making sure that you've just got access to that support for the other areas as and when they might arise. Obviously, if you've got that depth and breadth of expertise and skill set, then you're very lucky. But I know it's hard to you know, attract a good wide skill set to governing bodies in any event. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a priority, but great if you've got it.
Yeah, great if you manage to recruit someone who has that experience previously. I think that would be a bonus, but I wouldn't say it is essential.
Okay, great. I think we'll wrap it up there. In the post-webinar survey that you'll get once the webinar closes, you'll have the opportunity to indicate whether you'd like, whether you give permission for Irwin Mitchell to be in touch with you. And we can also send over a list of all your questions if we haven't managed to answer them all online now. But that just leaves me to thank Jenny and Amy for that webinar. You'll be able to download the slides from your panel, and it will be available to watch back on our website later on this afternoon. So thank you very much for joining us.